Our reading this morning is from the book 1 Corinthians. Paul writes to the church in Corinth, my favorite verse in the entire Bible. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has possibly imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. I could just close in prayer for that one, okay? But I do want to address this because what I'm going to say here this morning is a very big picture idea about what it means to be following Christ and following God. And during this past couple of weeks, I've had a Wednesday night series taking place called Common Grace. It is the best series I've ever done. And I was telling this to Lisa last week, and she said, that sounds really arrogant to say. And what I told her is, you could have a trained monkey sharing this stuff, because it's really not about me. This stuff is so good. All I got to do is throw it up there and just get out of the way. And so what I'm sharing with you this morning is, at least I'm trying to figure out how I can do this in a series. I don't know if I can pull it off. But at least I want to share in part with what I shared a couple weeks ago with the people out at the Story campus. And that is that the Bible suggests to us that there's a primordial, there's a genetic knowledge of God written in the heart of every single human being. Even those who say they do not believe. The scriptures would say those who say they do not believe, even God himself, they are suppressing the truth that's in them, that God has put in them. There's a sense of God that we're all born with. Innate sense to know right from wrong. To know when something's just or unjust. And one of the hallmarks of this, one of the ideas we know that's the case, is we all have a longing for something better, for something great, a longing for something special. And how we know that is you and I can look around the world, and you and I, it's very easy to see the misery, to see the injustice, to see the racism, to see the crime, to see the sadness, to see all the things that make us so sad, unjust systems, genocide, corrupt governments, starvations, the shootings we're seeing happen almost on a weekly basis now. We notice that. We look around and see that. And it may appear, we think that evil is winning, that things are actually getting worse. It's easy, in other words, it's easier to measure loss and suffering. But on the other side, I think it gets obscured. And I want to get a little philosophical here. I want to kind of prove my point for something I saw about 3 years ago. I'll go, I'm going to save that and use that. Well, today's the day, okay? And that is, many of you are on Facebook. Many of you are on Bluffton Ask, that page we have to kind of ask questions about Bluffton. And one of the things that someone put out nearly 3 years ago, I'll put it up here. They put the question out here on Facebook, what are some of the things you would change about Bluffton? In other words, what are some things you think would make Bluffton better? Or even a deeper question, what are the problems in Bluffton? Now, this question was put out, okay, and over 200 people commented on it. And most of the comments were not just a sentence, they were long rants about all the stuff that is wrong with our community we live in. So I thought I'd do a little experiment. And that is, the next day, I put out a post on Bluffton Ask, asking the question, okay, what are some things you think that are great about Bluffton? What are some things you think you love about Bluffton? Okay, so the other one was 200 comments. When I put this question out, we had 19. Okay, now I'm not a mathematician, but I talked to Josh Hicks, and he said that's a 10-to-1 ratio. So for every one great thing we see about Bluffton, there are 10 things we see that are wrong with the community. 10-to-1. Why? And this is where I want to get a little philosophical. C.S. Lewis said, this is my quote up here. People never, ever complain about having too many blessings. I found this on the internet, Jonathan H. Riddle, okay? But in my 25 years of ministry, and there's not a person that doesn't know this, nobody complains about having too many blessings. Nobody ever says that. And this does bring me to my Lewis quote. What he said, heaven is that remote music you and I were born remembering. Now, what's he talking about here? I would suggest to you the reason why we notice more what is wrong versus what is right is because you and I originally, in the beginning of time, mankind, the primordial knowledge written in the heart of every human being, originally you and I were built to live in a place where everything was perfect. There was no death. There was no disease. There was no sadness. There was no injustice. In other words, there was a time and a place where we lived in perfection. The Garden of Eden, where everything was perfect, and we walked with God in the cool evening hand in hand. We had perfect communion with God. And we felt we weren't afraid. We weren't scared. But because of the fall of man, we have lost that. And therefore, this is the reason why we feel so frustrated about life. This is the reason why people post 10 to 1 on Left and Ask about the things they see wrong. Because we are frustrated because we were meant originally to live there. And now we're here. And so when people complain or people get mad about people complaining, what I would say to you is the reason why they're doing it is because they notice this is just not right what we're living in. There's more. They think there's more. They desire more. And there's a reason why they do that. There's a reason why they think that. So even if they keep quiet, and even if I don't say anything, I still think it. Let's be honest here. I still think about what's wrong. I suppress it. So the Apostle Paul says in Romans 8, think about this. He says, I consider the sufferings of this present time, what I'm talking about here this morning, are not worth comparing, he says, with the glory that is being revealed to us. Now, what's he talking about here when he says the glory is being revealed to us? The Bible speaks of something greater and addresses a longing that all of us have in here. And I don't fear contradiction here at all, because I know I'm speaking to the heart here this morning. And let me see if I can just kind of prove it to you through what I would say common revelation, common grace, what I've talked about the last couple of weeks out at the historic campus. When we see goodness, when we see beauty, we are drawn to it. So, for example, back when I was just out of college, when I visited the Grand Canyon, and I sat out on the northern rim and watched the sun come up on the northern rim, all I remember thinking was I felt so full, and yet I had a longing to get behind what was behind that sun. Now, here's the thing is, I've watched people do this. They begin to worship the creation more than the person who created it. And see, what this is supposed to do is this is supposed to point us, the artist who made this painting, who created this, is just to focus and long for the artist, for the creator. And therefore, it creates a longing in us. Or let me put it another way. Of the joy we feel when we go by and we see parents playing with their children. We see fathers swinging their children on a swing. And we see them smiling and laughing. We feel something about that. Or let me put it another way, too. I think there are times where we feel overwhelmed when someone holds us and lets us know that we're not alone. That touches the heart. It creates a longing in us to even get behind the pain. Or the moments that feed our souls when we see children laughing, okay? And by the way, that is my daughter right in the middle up there and her best friend Maggie. And they are always laughing. And when they laugh, I laugh. And when we see children laughing, you know, you've watched the YouTube videos of little babies laughing. You feel happy. Why is that? Where does that come from? Just the sight of love and happiness, people enjoying life, it puts wind in our sails. It makes us feel more alive. And therefore, I would say to you, I guess I'm suggesting to you, what I think the scriptures are teaching us, is that this is the way it's always supposed to be. And it's not. And therefore, in this life, in my opinion, these are signposts, longings that are pointing us to something greater. They're leading us somewhere. And let me see if I can expound on this for the next few minutes. I shared this maybe a year ago. There's a woman named Evelyn Underhill who died. I think she died way back in the early 40s, but she wrote a book called Worship that I found very striking, very profound. And inside the book, she talked about there are three great longings. There are three great expressions of restlessness. Three deep longings that all human beings feel. And she said, regardless of culture, regardless of economic background, regardless of when they were born, all of us have felt all three of these or one of these at one point in our lives. All of us have. And therefore, she says the literature that grabs us, the movies that we're drawn to, the music we listen to, the art that seems to touch our heart and our soul, all speak of these three longings, all of them. What is she talking about here? Well, she says number one is the longing for a perfect place to live. The home we've longed to get to our entire lives. We ache for it. We may even have a hard time defining it. We just know we feel it. And the illusion is we think we can get this in this life. Okay, this is the reason why we hear all the time, I am finally moving into my dream home. Okay? And anybody who's moved into a dream home knows you feel like that for what, a year, 2 years, right? And all of a sudden, okay, there must be another dream home somewhere. Okay? I mean, it's always around the corner. It's always over the bend, over the hill. It's always somewhere else. And this is the reason why, and even Evelyn Underhill said this, gosh, nearly 80 years ago. She said, this is the reason why the great literature speaks of these places. It speaks of this longing to get to this place that we've longed for our entire lives, this perfect place to live. And the great literature, okay, I've talked about this when Tolkien wrote about Rivendell, that heavenly celestial city. You know, the longing for Camelot, the place of perfection. Or as Lewis wrote in Narnia, to get out of the Shadowlands, what we live in right now, to get behind that wave, to get to the other side, the place of perfection. Or even in modern times is, and I've certainly talked about this with my own children, okay, Peter Pan, Neverland. I mean, seriously, I mean this in all seriousness. What is Neverland about? Okay, it's about never growing old. It's about flying. It's about a golden age. It's about having friendships that you never lose. Friendships that literally last forever. It's a divine whisper written by a secular man of a longing that all of us have to get to the place where all that beauty comes from. And therefore, the stories that this gives you the idea and lets you live with the idea there's a way to have a love that is never lost. There's a way to escape death. There's a way where we can get to a place where there's no more sadness. There's no more crying. There's no more tears. There's a time, in other words, where evil will be utterly defeated. And we long to get there. And these are why these stories so deeply, deeply move us and why we're drawn to them. And why I think, in my opinion, why it captures our imaginations. It's common grace. And the thing is, we long for it. And let me just say, okay, this is not just some kind of pop psychology here, all right? This idea, what we long for, this comes right out of the Scriptures. And look what it says here. Abraham was what? Was longing for a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. One of the greatest people in history was longing for something greater, something more, something special. And so we long for the perfect place to live. Secondly, Underhill said is, that she says, and this is true for all of us, is we long for a soul to soul. We long for a perfect mate. And of course, what's so interesting about this is, I want a little theological background. Before the fall of man, before sin entered into the world, there was one ache in the garden that was not the result of sin. It was before it happened. That was the ache of companionship. Okay, it says there, God said it is not good for man to be alone. That happened before the fall. So we had this desire, this longing for companionship. We have this longing to meet someone, or maybe a group of people who we can say, and you too think like that? A common taste, a common vision, a common point of view. that you possess and very few understand. And by the way, let me add here, a lot of us, almost everybody goes into marriage thinking they can get this. Okay, and somewhere, either 6 months into the marriage, 2 years in the marriage, somewhere along the line you go, there is nobody that can provide this. Even the best marriages leave this longing we have, this desire. And so I've said before, there's no person on this earth can possibly fulfill this longing we have. Thirdly, what Underhill said is, and that is for each one of us in here, at one time in our lives, she says, we have a longing for perfection. We have a longing to see things perfect. And this is the reason why, by the way, and I can certainly say this is about true of me, this is the reason why I feel, and probably many of you feel, always so frustrated about so many things in life, right? The house is never clean enough. Am I alone in here? Okay. Work is never right. Our children never turn out the way we hope them to turn out. They would certainly say, my parents are not the way I hope them to be. And this is the reason why. It doesn't matter. It's anything and everything. We feel a deep, deep sense of frustration because we say there's something better. There's something to be something more. Things are supposed to be perfect. And therefore, the reason why we are drawn to great art and great music that almost get to perfection, or I think why we're drawn to athletics and to athletes who seem like they can almost get to perfection. We love that. I will tell you, I've shared this memory before. The earliest memory in my life, okay, I believe I was 4 years old, so this was in 1973, okay? The earliest memory I ever had was my father. I've often said my father is the toughest man I've ever seen in my life. I can't imagine I'll ever meet anybody tougher than him. I think I've seen him cry 2 or 3 times in my entire life. And I remember the very first memory I had of him was him jumping up and down in our living room, our den, and tears were falling down his face. And he was jumping up with his hands almost hitting the ceiling. And years ago, I was asking about this, and he said, I totally forgot about that. And I said, what were you doing? And he said to me, this is what I never forgot, he said, I was watching Secretariat run down the Belmont to win the Belmont by 31 lengths. And it was a couple of years ago, right after he got pancreatic cancer. I remember we were talking about this, and he said, I've done some thinking about that. Why was I so moved by that? And I never forgot this. My father said to me, all my life I've been chasing perfection, and I've never been able to get it. And that day at the Belmont, I saw it. And that's what moved me. He's right. I mean, we all desire this chase for perfection. And we try to make this place we have here perfect, and we just can't get there. Let me remind you, okay, the writer of Hebrews says, for this world is not our permanent home. This world as we know it right now is not our permanent home. We are looking forward. We are longing for a home that is yet to come. Okay, the New Jerusalem. Now, let me say something that's really important here. And that is, I was just having this conversation with someone 2 weeks ago at a birthday party. And they were saying to me in private, I wish I could believe that. They're a skeptic, and some of you maybe are skeptics. You're searching, you're looking, you're seeking. And I just want to address something I think that's really important, because they had honest questions about honest doubts. And they said, I want to believe something like that. I really do. I just cannot seem to connect the dots. And what I told them, and I'm telling you now, and I've said this before, but I learned this from C.S. Lewis, okay, of course, right? But what he said, and I've never gotten over this, because I think this speaks to common grace. I think this speaks to the longing we all have. But he said, even if you do not believe, you can look around the world and see and observe by nature itself, by rational thought, by the laws of nature, you can observe that creatures are not born with desires unless there's a way to satisfy the desires. So, for example, Lewis says, babies are born desiring milk. There's such thing as milk. Human beings desire to learn. There's such thing as knowledge. Ducks are born wanting to swim in the water. There's such thing as water. Human beings feel sexual desire. There's such thing as sex. And what he says is, and I think this is absolutely dead on if you think about this, if we have a desire for a perfect place to live, if we have a desire to have perfect relationships that are never broken, if we have a desire to live in a perfect place, if we have a desire to have a love that can never be lost, that transcends time and death and space itself, if we all have those desires and nothing in this world that can satisfy the desires, what Lewis said is the most probable explanation is that you and I were built for another world. We were built for a place that transcends time and space itself. And here's where I think Christianity is just unlike anything I've come across in history. It is the only religion that holds out both a radical hope for our present circumstances and also for our future. Both matter. And you don't hear a lot of ministers say that. They all talk about just what's happening in the future. Just grin and bear it. That's not the story of the Bible. If anything, the Bible is saying this world we live in matters. The present circumstances matter. And, a few years ago, I taught a whole class on heaven. And if you ask me the one thing that came across in that class I taught, that 3-week series, it's what Jesus said about heaven. And it's not what he said, it's what he didn't say. Jesus did not talk about us frolicking on the top of the clouds. He did not talk about, angels playing harps. If anything, he said, it's about unleashing that heaven is right here. It's right here in another dimension. This is why they say the people that have gone before us in Christ can see what we're doing right now. They can join us here in worship. And that we are to unleash heaven here on earth the best we possibly can. And therefore, it is here. It's both present and future. It says in John, I saw a new heaven. John talked about this in the book of Revelation. I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The old heaven and the old earth had passed away. And he says, and I saw heaven coming down to here, this place. And it says, look, God's home is now among his people. And God is now living with his people. Us. That's our future, nothing less and nothing more. And what this tells me is this physical earth matters. So the question I think we should be answering here is, what is our role to bring to bear God's will in this little tiny corner of the globe that God has us in? And I like to think big picture here, okay? When we think about the Lord's Prayer, when Jesus asks us to pray, your kingdom come, what's happening on earth and what's happening in heaven would happen here on earth. And that is that the idea is, what he's saying here is, what's currently happening in the city of God, what's currently happening in that celestial city, heaven itself, what's currently going on there, that's not happening down here where we live, we would do every single thing in our power to make it happen here on earth. Thy will, that's happened in the city of God, we would make it happen here in the city of man. And what connects our future with our present is this very idea right here. So therefore, anytime you've ever made any impact on the world at all, you're in some sense, even a very small thing, you are living this out right here. So every time we live out Jesus' prayer, life is made a little bit better. I would say life is renewed. And honestly, I do not know how this occurs. I just know it does. And when this occurs, there's a little tiny shift, a seismic shift in the power of the universe that's bent a little more toward the gospel and seeing heaven unleashed here on earth. Because here's the bottom line. I can just imagine my 19-year-old son saying, Dad, just tell me the bottom line, okay? Don't tell me the other 10 minutes. Just tell me the bottom line here. And the bottom line is this. God has plans for not only you and me, but he has plans for this place we live in right now, this earth. And over the years, those of you who know me privately know I'm very green, okay? I'm very outspoken about that too. And people have made fun of me about that. I apologize for nothing, because I think it's the story of the Scriptures. God's greatest creation he's given us. He's put us here for a reason, not only to take care of it, but he has even a bigger reason for us. And let me just take this even a step further. For years, I would have been absolutely terrified to get up and do what I'm doing right now, because I would look to other people who were more talented, who were greater, who just had more gifts than me, and I was afraid. I was scared. You know, here I am, introverted, dyslexic, not smart enough, I can't lead. And I don't know when it was, years ago, finally, I don't know if I heard this or somebody said to me, basically, God's saying to me, dude. Well, he didn't say dude, okay? He said, get over your own narcissism. This ain't about you. This is about this. And now I realize now it is about showing up and being seen. And therefore, I would say to you, without exception, once I began to realize, I began to see God's glory in places I didn't even know were there. I began to see it everywhere when I just started getting out and being seen. And I will say to you, there has only been a few times in my life, I probably can count on one hand, where I have been to the mountaintop and I have looked over just enough to see what's in our future. And therefore, I can say without a doubt now, Jesus is alive. I haven't given my life to a dead Christ. I've given my life to a living one. And because of that, I'm not as scared as I used to be. He's given me a song to sing. He's given me a reason for existence. I know where I come from. I know why I'm here. I know where I'm going. And that has changed everything. Everything. And I discovered, just through being beaten up by life, I discovered you can be strong, you can be brave, and you can be broken all at the same time and still be used by God. And that is all of us here. All of us here. So let me just put this real time. Let me make this real time where we live in our present time. That means I can't go through everybody's vocation, but I think you'll get the picture here. Those of you that practice law, those of you who defend the law, those who are in law enforcement, they're spending their lives trying to bring out justice and righteousness in a society that's pushing against that. They want to see righteousness and justice for people. Those who practice medicine or in the medical field want to bring healing to those who live in a very broken world, whose lives are filled with pain and sadness. Those that are engineers and architects, you want to build great structures that people long to live in, that make our society a better world to live in. You know, those that make the home, they're basically a home builder. They're building their homes for their family, for their spouse, for their children. They want to build a home that you long to go home to, a place of peace, a place of happiness. Those who teach want to teach in such a way where people are increasing in knowledge and wisdom and stature. We all have these desires, these longings. In other words, everyone has a longing to make a difference and help people. But everyone here also knows in here, those who do all these different things, everybody knows once you try to get out in the world and start doing these things, okay, because of the fall, because of thorns and thistles grow up in the garden, we never can seem to get there. Have you discovered that? I mean, you just can never get there. And it's very easy to get discouraged here. And what I'm saying to you this morning is, you must not allow the enemy to drag you into the shadows. You must become the light that God has put in you, to shine it for all the world to see. Christianity, unlike any religion I've ever come across, gives us a radical hope and says the passions and the vices we see and desire to see the human race be all that it is to be, that place actually exists. It's real. And this is the reason why I think Paul said, when he said is, there is a hope. There's a hope. Everything that has been made in the world, everything that's been made will be set free from the power that destroys it. Everything. And so, therefore, when Paul says there's a hope here, I think this is getting back on what Underhill said. We have a longing for a perfect place to live. We have longing for just deep, deep, deep relationships where people can know us as we truly are. We have a longing for perfection. And therefore, what I'm saying to you is, what the Bible, I think, is saying to you is those who are in law, who practice law, who defend the law, there will be a day, there will be a time, there is a place where there'll be perfect righteousness and justice. Those who are architects and engineers, those who build things, there will be a day where in the city of God, when those buildings will literally last forever. Those who are musicians and artists who work so hard in this life to bring about beauty, there is a place of perfection where everything we see and everything we hear will be the most beautiful thing we've ever heard before. Those who are in medicine, spiritually, physically, emotionally, there is a time when there will be perfect healing. There'll be no more death, there'll be no more sorrow, there'll be no more tears. Those who try to make our home a special place, there is a home, Jesus says. Jesus says to us, he gives us this wonderful image. Jesus says this, and I want to put the picture up here, okay? Jesus says, I do not want you to be anxious. I don't want you to be worried. In my Father's house are many rooms, and I am going to prepare a place just for you. And one day, whether it's tonight or 50 years from tonight, I'm going to come back, and I'm going to take you to be with me, that you may be where I am. And it's like, and Thomas said, where are you talking about, Jesus? And Jesus says to Thomas, you know to the place where I'm going, Thomas. You know the way. You've always known it. You've longed for it your entire life. I'm upholding the idea, okay, if people see this, who would not want this? What the Bible's saying here, what Jesus is saying here, in my opinion, it touches the heart. The longing for the perfect place to live, for the perfect relationship, for perfection. It touches the heart. And once you touch the heart like this, that's limitless. It literally lasts forever. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has possibly conceived or even imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. And so it is with you. Let's pray. Lord, it is easy to look around and to see the sadness and the brokenness and all that is wrong. But the only way, Lord, we could possibly see that is if we measure it to a place that is even greater than the one we can see. We pray this morning, Lord, you would give us a foresight, a vision to see beyond what this world sees, to see a home that you are preparing just for us. Help us, Lord, to remember that our future, what we know is coming, will directly impact how we live now. And maybe even more important, Lord, that we can make a difference right now where you have us. Because, Lord, it ain't about changing the world. It's about making an impact on the space and the place you have us in here. This little place of this world, this little tiny corner of South Carolina here in Bluffton. May we remember, Lord, remember where we have come from, why we're here, and where we're going. It's because of that we give you thanks. It's in your name we ask and pray these things.